Greetings. My presentation topic is the adoption of frozen human embryos. A little bit of background information. What we'll be speaking about is referred to as HET, heterologous embryo transfer. Heterologous meaning derived from a different organism or not genetically related. Neither adoptive parent, is biologically related to the embryo involved. The freezing or the cryogenic process involves removing the water from the embryo, replacing it with kind of what amounts to be medical antifreeze, and then freezing the embryo. In order to transfer the embryo later, the embryo is thawed, the antifreeze is removed, the embryo is rehydrated, assessed for viability. If it's judged to be good, worthwhile, implanted into the womb of a woman. These different theologians and authors all do have areas of agreement on this topic. They agree that IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is wrong. It removes conception from the marital act. They believe in general that this whole situation of extra embryos just shouldn't even exist. They also agree that surrogacy is wrong. Surrogacy defined as a woman being paid to carry a child and then surrender the child after birth. But payment is involved. That's the key with surrogacy. Nicholas Tanti Filippini, in his long article entitled The Embryo Rescue Debate, Impregnating Women, Ectogenesis, and Restoration from Suspended Animation, believes that it is not morally acceptable to adopt frozen human embryos. He believes they should be thawed, rehydrated, and resume their normal dynamic. Part of this dynamic, unfortunately, will be death. He addresses a number of issues. He talks about HET and marriage. He believes that the generative faculty is to be reserved only for marriage. In HET, the husband is isolated from the wife in becoming pregnant, except perhaps for consenting to his wife being impregnated. Tanti Filippini believes that this is a type of infidelity for the wife to choose to use her body to carry a child that's not biologically related to either her or her husband. Marriage is a total self-giving, and he asks, is a woman giving herself completely to her husband when she's carrying an unrelated embryo? Tanti Filippini believes she's not. I don't agree that it's infidelity, but I do believe it's an intimate type of giving that's not appropriate. He goes into detail about cryopreservation and the morality of cryopreservation. Biological activity is interrupted. The embryo is alive, but not maturing. All activity has ceased. He refers to it as a type of suspended animation, frozen anhydrous embryo being stored in a freezer. This, he believes, deprives the child of the protection of a mother. He says life is being produced in an environment that cannot sustain it. He believes the obligation is to rehydrate and thaw the embryos. He addresses as well cooperation and association with reproductive technology. At the time he wrote the article, the survival rate of these embryos was less than 4%. So many embryos are created because so few survive the process. The embryos are evaluated for irregularities, and some are simply discarded. There's cooperation as well required to time the women's cycle for implantation. He believes it's inappropriate to get involved knowing that the chance of success is so low. He also addresses ectogenesis, that is, gestation outside the womb of a woman. He believes if somehow down the road artificial wombs were created, it would not be acceptable to grow a child that way. Also, if science allowed for a child to be gestated in the womb of an animal, that would also not be acceptable. These are both affronts to the dignity of the human person. So in summary, Tanti Filippini believes that due to the nature of marriage and self-giving, the dangers of cryopreservation, cooperation with the IVF industry, and the possibility of gestation outside of the womb of a woman in the future, adoption of embryos is not acceptable. He believes they deserve to be thawed, rehydrated, and resume their normal dynamic, be allowed to die. William May, in The Object of the Acting Woman in Embryo Rescue, believes a woman, married or single, may have an abandoned embryo implanted into her womb and nurture it there as a means to protect its life. His consideration and responses to objections: he believes we need to look at the object of the act. We know that the object of an act is the end of a deliberate decision, that is, to have an embryo implanted in the womb of a woman. That object also includes being pregnant, since that's required to nurture the child. May believes that this object is not against the good of human life. May also addresses pregnancy and infidelity. He believes the woman is not cooperating with IVF, in vitro fertilization, because the child already exists. She's not bringing the child into existence herself or contributing to that. He distinguishes between fertilization and implantation as two separate actions, which I agree they are. He says a woman is not giving herself to a man other than her husband, therefore there is no sexual infidelity. May's opinion is that HET does not violate the unitive aspect of marriage, and that the generative capacity is not strictly for marriage. Addressing the idea of giving up the child after birth, he believes that there is no surrogacy involved as long as the woman is not being paid. And he defines 3 types of motherhood: biological motherhood, gestational motherhood, and social motherhood. Ideally, all 3 would be the same woman, but we know that is not what's happening today. May believes that in the case of embryo adoption, the gestational mother should be the social mother, although that's not required. In summary, May believes that the implantation of an adopted embryo is a good object, and either single or married women may take part in order to protect the life of a child. Finally, Reverend Peter Ryan, in Our Moral Obligation to Abandon Embryos, believes it is legitimate and even praiseworthy to adopt an embryo when the alternative is death. He refers to HET as a form of rescue, and he also addresses a number of objections. He believes the purpose of the act, the object, and the circumstance all must be considered. The purpose of the act is to save a life. The object is the transfer and subsequent nurturing of the child. And the circumstances are rescuing a child from death. He also responds to a number of objections. He believes that inserting an embryo into the womb of a woman is not intercourse, therefore there is no issue of infidelity. He goes into a little bit more detail about the possibility of pregnancy only being through one spouse. Ideally, this is the norm, of course, but we know that women can become pregnant through affairs or through rape. The act that led to pregnancy may be wrong, but the act of carrying the child is not wrong. And so therefore, strictly speaking, he believes that pregnancy does not have to be only with one spouse. Ryan makes clear the difference between conception, procreation, and gestation. Conception can take place between a husband and a wife, or conception can take place in a lab. But he believes that procreation is what takes place between 2 people, not in a lab. Gestation, then, is what happens after either conception or procreation. He believes that adopting an embryo is acting in the interest of the child, and that it's acceptable to be the gestational mother, but not necessarily the social mother, as long as a life is saved. He addresses as well the responsibility for the frozen embryos. Who is responsible? The biological parents? The clinic? He believes, though, the goal is to save as many lives as possible. He even suggests the possibility of a government campaign to adopt as many embryos as possible. While that's a great goal, I think it's not only unrealistic, but I think it's a really bad idea to put the government in charge of these lives and this whole industry. In summary, Reverend Ryan believes that embryo adoption is acceptable in order to save a life, and that a woman can be the gestational mother, but not the social mother of the child. My response to all of this: I believe that it is not prudent to adopt frozen embryos due to the significant cooperation with the whole IVF industry and the impossibility of predicting future technologies. There has to be significant cooperation with the whole IVF industry in order to adopt these embryos. So many embryos are quote-unquote left over. Many are created because of the high failure rate involved. This being able to donate can ease the conscience of the biological parents. They know many embryos have to be created, and rather than make the choice to destroy them or freeze them indefinitely, they can feel good about giving their embryos to another couple. I believe this leads to more embryos being created because the biological parents know maybe someone will adopt them someday. This giving away of embryos, I believe, treats children as commodities. They're not like a litter of puppies to be given to a good home. They're souls with an infinite value. There's significant cooperation with the clinics. Just as Tanti Filippini believes, a woman must cooperate with the clinic in order to time her cycle and receive these embryos. Embryos are donated to other couples once the biological parents decide they don't want them anymore. Couples are free to just give their embryos away. Clinics are taking charge of these lives. The object and the intention. Given the testimonies I read from families who have taken part in donating or receiving embryos, it's clear to me that the intention is not always altruistic. Many couples admitted that they wanted to experience pregnancy, or feel the baby kick, or give birth to their children. There was no mention of saving lives. It was all about what they wanted to get out of it, what was good for them. This, I believe, relates back to Griset's third mode of responsibility. One should not choose to satisfy an emotional desire except as part of the pursuit of basic human good. Saving a life is certainly a human good, but emotional desires should not be satisfied at the expense of human dignity and donating children to other couples. Future reproductive technologies, we just have no idea where this is going. There have been articles very recently about donor wombs being implanted in women so they can then have embryos transferred and carry a child. More than one doctor admitted that once the procedures, the drugs, and even the hormones are perfected, a man could possibly carry a child. So in summary, my position is that due to significant cooperation with the whole IVF industry, the treatment of embryos as commodities, and the future possibilities of reproductive technologies, adoption of embryos is not an option.